Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you for tuning in last week to our live UBCM show. This week we are moving on back to provincial politics because there is so much to talk about, and the session is just around the corner. Beginning next week, the fall legislative agenda unfolds. We're going to talk a little bit about that, probably in a podcast audio extra, so make sure you subscribe to our audio podcast as well. We're going to bring in the panel here to talk about the week in politics. Allie Blades, Jillian Oliver, back after taking a month off. Jillian, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being back. And birthday boy, Jeff Ferrier, turning, let me just check my notes here, 28 years old. Jeff, thanks for doing the show on your birthday.
My pleasure. Can't think of something I'd rather be doing.
Well, that's good. That's good. You delivered that.
I mean that.
Okay.
It's going to be fun.
All right. Well, the first issue is pipeline politics. And Alberta's premier put this back on the agenda this week, announcing that her government intends to push forward and develop some type of proposal for a million barrel a day oil pipeline to BC's coast. Get it on the desk of the Prime Minister by May is what Danielle Smith said. And then hopefully, in her words, get it onto the major projects list of the Prime Minister and find a private proponent. BC's premier reacted quite angrily, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, saying, not on my watch, essentially. Allie, well, actually, you know what? Sorry, Jillian, you were in the right after being away to go first. Tell us what you think about this.
I think Smith is just, basically trying to put pressure on the Prime Minister to clear regulatory and legislative hurdles, basically make it easier for her to find a proponent because none exists right now. I kind of think, Eby's strategy so far has been to say there is no proponent. This is going to require taxpayer dollars. It doesn't exist. Why would I respond to it? I think to date, that's sort of been working for him because it's made her come out on her own. In response, we saw a bunch of First Nations come out against it. So he has avoided putting himself as sort of the person standing in the way of it and kind of let it unfold a little bit further. But I think he's getting to the point where he might need to take a bit of a stronger argument because the things that he's saying just kind of are starting to not hold up when his government is also giving a lot of tax breaks and tax dollars to LNG projects, announced just a week apart from responding to this. I think it's time for him to make a more forceful argument against why a pipeline doesn't deserve tax dollars, because the reality is right now with the economic situation that we're in, every big project or new initiative is going to require some sort of government support at this point.
That's true. Ranging from, the tax breaks that LNG Canada received in order to get to a final investment decision, all the way up to the Site C Dam, which was an entirely provincially funded project. You get varying levels of private investment. Jeff, what do you make of the Premier's response and Alberta's push here?
Well, I think the Premier's response does hold water because it has the merit of being true. Look, this isn't a project; it's a mirage. It's a $60 to $70 billion mirage that the oil patch is so excited about that they've so far invested exactly nothing, not a single thin dime. If this ever moves forward, it's going to be taxpayers footing most or all of the bill. And as for me, I can think of better things to spend $70 billion on than a make-believe pipeline.
Well, that was essentially what Eby said, Allie. Do you think it landed with what the Alberta Premier was saying?
No, I think what's happening here is that Danielle Smith is offering a chance to figure out what the solution can be while working with the federal government. To Jillian's point, though, I think that this hostility towards the announcement doesn't necessarily work because it means that you're iced out of the conversation when we're starting to talk about the regulatory changes that are needed for this to really come to fruition. In summary here, she wants to make sure that the emissions cap is talked about. She wants to make sure that we're talking about the tanker ban. These are British Columbia issues. And so if you're going to be hostile and say that I don't want anything to do with this because this is a make-believe mirage of a project, you're also excluding yourself from the conversation that's also going to impact British Columbians.
What about the tanker ban? Let's go around on that, because it feels like maybe part of this is the Alberta Premier trying to get the Prime Minister, get this thing on his desk to the point where he has to make a decision about the tanker ban. We saw the CEO of Enbridge come out in a speech this week saying no private company will get involved building a pipeline to nowhere if you can't put tankers at the end of it and ship it somewhere. Jeff, let's go back to you on this. So do you think it is trying to force the Prime Minister to make a move on the tanker ban? And also, what if we reach a point where he has to start making decisions that the BC government might not support?
Well, I think on the tanker ban, I think that British Columbia will hold fast on its position that it wants to keep it in place until they see a project that merits taking the tanker ban off. Look, I think what Smith is doing here is very political. She's a master of changing the channel back home in Alberta. For folks who aren't watching Alberta politics so closely, she's in the middle of a scandal where there's corruption allegations related to health contracts. And so what comes up? This pipeline. And when this thing stalls, and it's going to stall, what's she going to do? She's going to call an election. She's going to blame BC. She's going to blame Ottawa. And she's going to run as Alberta's great defender. It's pretty shrewd politics, but it's politics.
Jillian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think on top of all of those issues that Jeff mentioned, Alberta is also facing a new big deficit. They went from an $8.6 billion surplus to a $6.5 billion deficit because the price of oil is tanking. And that's why you're not seeing proponents jump up and raise their hands to get in support of another Canadian pipeline project, because it's economically risky. And I think Smith doesn't have any other ideas for how to grow the economy.
Yeah. Allie?
To use Danielle Smith's words, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, though. The whole point of this advisory group is to make sure that they're creating an economic path for that private capital to come into these two provinces. And so while there's nothing in terms of private investment right now, there could be, is what she's trying to convey with this. Yes, it is political, to Jeff's point, but that sometimes needs to be leveraged in order to really get a favorable response from the federal government as well. So good for her for putting some money behind that as they try to advocate for the issues that are going to end up helping Albertans.
You've all been in politics long enough to remember, as I remember, the 2017 NDP government opposing the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion and realizing that it actually had, in the words of John Horgan, no tools eventually to do anything about it, but it could make investors, in that case Kinder Morgan, very nervous, and they get out of the project entirely. Do you think BC follows that same path, Jeff, if this develops, knowing that it can't stop a project that the Prime Minister might deem in the national interest or that might proceed? How far does it go, do you think, having gone through the TMX pipeline issue and realizing that the province can't withhold permits, it can't actually really do anything?
Yeah, I think the TMX sale from the private sector to the federal government was more about the First Nations component than it was about BC. I think that the pipeline advocates there knew well that British Columbia didn't have the tools, but they were acutely aware that if you're going to build anything in British Columbia, you have to have meaningful engagement with First Nations, and that wasn't happening on that pipeline until the federal government stepped in. Look, if I think BC is going to hold true to its values. I think Premier Eby is going to hold true to his value. He's going to say we're not going to review a project that does not exist, especially at a time when we should be focusing on LNG and mining in the Northwest as the real drivers of economic growth in BC and Canada.
Jillian, do you think we get to a point where it's Eby versus the world here?
I don't know if he has to. I think, we saw those First Nations, a couple of them come out this week against the project. I think he can kind of let them take the lead, and they have the greater legal standing anyway. I think talking about alternatives, I think LNG, like I said, I think it comes off a little hypocritical, but I think being a bit more specific and a bit of a stronger advocate for what the economic alternatives are to sort of give the Prime Minister an out is kind of the way to go on this.
Yeah, LNG though, it doesn't sink like like oil in the ocean. So there is that argument the government might use, Allie, to say that at least LNG, or natural gas wouldn't pollute the environment like oil if something went wrong.
Let's not be confused, though. I think now David Eby also has a threat within the Green Party and the resurgence of, life and a bit of a new leader that's ready to take this issue on. And so perhaps his comments this week are also with the veil of concern that the Greens might come after him and take some of his voter base as well.
Okay, great. We're going to come back from a commercial break here to talk a bit about BC Conservative leader John Rustad in trouble for firing a caucus communication staffer. We'll be back just after these messages. All right, welcome back. Our next topic here, BC Conservative leader John Rustad fired a junior communications staffer this week, and boy, is he facing an internal revolt over that issue. It doesn't sound serious. Allie, we're going to come to you to get you explain it a bit to us, but Lindsay Shepherd, the person who was fired over tweets that she made calling Orange Shirt Day and the orange flag essentially the grandest lie of them all, and that is a disgrace that the orange shirt flag flies at the legislature, caused her to get fired, but she's a longtime member of the party, and that hasn't gone over well. Just sort of explain to us what's going on there.
Yeah, this is really fundamentally a problem of managing a coalition party. The context for this particular person in Lindsay Shepherd, she's the author of a book on confronting campus free speech crisis. So it's relative to what's happening right now. She has a significant media following, more followers on X than the Premier. She was a member of the Conservative Party of BC board until just recently. She was featured at the annual general meeting as an MP. All of this is important because she's a darling of the Conservative Party. And then on a national profile, we're now seeing federal members of parliament weigh in via very carefully worded posts, mind you. There was a Toronto Star article about this as well. And so this isn't just a staffer. This is someone with a significant following, and she's definitely using it to her advantage. Now, the problem that I believe is happening here is that there's a caucus operations crisis in managing this coalition. The tough situation for the leader right now is very similar to a speech, one of my favorite speeches from Candace Bergen, who at the time was the leader of the Conservative Party federally. And this was at the peak of a narrative building about the divide within the federal caucus, with MP Leslyn Lewis talking about her pro-life advocacy and how that reconciles with her colleagues that may have differing opinions. But what the fundamentally with this part of the speech was that she concluded it in saying that the internal debate makes them stronger and more representative of the Canadians that they represent. The problem with John Rustad right now is that this is all very, very public. And there's so much that he could have done, Rob. Like, he could have prepared a statement knowing that she had a significant following. He could have very well also leveraged that coalition of conservatives that he has within his caucus. What could have been if the statement included a quote from an MLA that with the two MLAs with those two differing opinions. And then finally, in this crisis comms management, what he did, he lost the plot on what it should have been, which is continue to talk about his position on the issue. He could have done that with a video. This was the week to do that. He could have talked about his previous commitment to the reconciliation file when he was the minister responsible for it. Then he missed the opportunity to do that, and now she's taking their narrative, and he's not even responding at all.
Aren't we missing, Jeff, though, like the other part of this, which is if you're a junior staffer in a political caucus, you don't get to beak off online with your hot takes about whatever is in your mind. You're part of a team. You have an employer. You have a caucus. You have a leader you're representing. Like, what kind of, I mean, just remove the parties and the people from this. It seems like that was maybe a fireable offense.
Yeah, if you want to have full freedom of speech without consequence, become the leader of a political party. Then you won't have consequence from your own ranks.
Or run for office, even.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, become the leader, run for office. If you're free to say whatever you want as a staffer, but expect that if it is something that is in direct opposition to what the leader has established as party position, you're probably going to get booted out the door, and that's what happened here. And I think John Rustad, frankly, did the right thing here. I think the bigger issue is that BC needs a strong opposition. We see the BC Conservatives, as Allie noted, struggling with those growing pains. As a result, they're not focused on holding the government to account. They're having bum fights with each other. And at some point, they've got to decide if they're going to be a big tent Conservative party, or if they're going to be a branch plant of American culture war politics.
Jillian, what do you think? John Rustad, I guess it's worth pointing out, he got booted from the BC Liberal Party for tweets he made about climate change, and now he's the one booting people. There's a lot of booting in it going on in a circular fashion.
Exactly. I was going to make that point. I think, he started or became leader of the Conservatives because of a very similar issue and promising to have more free speech in his party. New political parties are experiments, and we've seen this sort of like realignment in BC politics since the Conservatives have become the official opposition. At the same time, the far right is being driven by the rise of the right in the US and this sort of anti-woke, say anything goes kind of politics down there. And I think while most of Canadian society is sort of trying to actively resist the influence of American political culture right now, it's really hard to drown it out and to ignore it. So it's a really interesting question, I think, for all of Canadian politics right now. Are we going to continue to sort of have our own culture, or are Conservatives going to be subsumed? I think it was really interesting to see what Pierre Poilievre did. He put out a really strong statement framing the issue as government intervention and saying that residential schools are an example of government overreach, and the federal Conservatives are going to stand up against that. I think probably anticipating that this was going to be a divisive issue within his caucus, and trying to find a unique angle that really fits with their shared values, so that he could sort of limit the outspokenness within his own caucus.
Yeah. Okay, coming up, we're going to discuss the new Downtown Eastside czar. Should we call him a czar? Why are we calling these people a czar? That's one of the questions I'll put to the panel coming up after the break. All right, welcome back. Premier David Eby appointing a new Downtown Eastside advisor / czar, former Vancouver Mayor and Senator Larry Campbell. It comes just a few months after he had to fire the last czar, Michael Bryant, because of public backlash over the idea of hiring a czar. Jeff, czar, yes. Czar, no. Why? I don't even know why we use that term, but do we need a Downtown Eastside advisor?
I know why we use czar. It's because there's headline writers in newspapers that have only so much space, and
God bless them.
Czar is a short way to say it. I think we do. I think Larry Campbell is a good person to do it. He's a former police officer, former coroner, former mayor, former senator. He's someone who knows Vancouver really well. He brings people together. He knows the Downtown Eastside really well, and I think it's important because cabinet ministers have so much that they deal with on a daily basis, and you need anyone who's walked down the streets in Vancouver along Hastings. And you know about the deaths, you know about the street disorder. You got to do what you can to bring it to a stop. If I were the one question I have, though, is we're a Vancouver Island show here, and Victoria has its own challenges. I'm wondering if there's going to be a czar for Victoria now.
We would call it probably the Pandora Ave Poobah, I think, not czar, but that's just me. But Jillian, I guess one of the problems here is that we're 3 years into the premier promising to get hold of the Downtown Eastside, one of his first promises as premier, and now we're reviewing it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was interesting. One thing that jumped out to me is very different framing between announcing Bryant and announcing Campbell. Bryant, the premier, said that we need a fresh set of eyes on this problem. Now they're bringing in someone who has been around for a long time, very much not a fresh set of eyes, somebody who has a real connection to the neighborhood and a lot of experience. And I think that shows that this is about relationships and government wanting to have someone to sort of smooth things over. I think both probably genuine to, for moving things along, making sure that the housing is getting expedited, services are getting expedited and all of those things. But also we've got a municipal election coming up with a Vancouver mayor who wants to crack down and sweep the Downtown Eastside, and a provincial government that is moving away from progressive solutions like harm reduction towards more conservative ones, like involuntary care. So I think having somebody with good relationships and credibility in that sort of world is probably why they've made this appointment.
Yeah, all the validators were there behind him, as opposed to Michael Bryant, who seemed to tick some people off for not consulting with them in his earliest days. Allie, we only have about 45 seconds. What do you think of this?
But those endorsements came and the rollout came because the last time that the NDP government tried to do this, that it didn't land very well, and that person ended up being fired right away. And so the launch of this mattered just as much as the substance of work that he's going to have to do.
And then to that extent, I guess it launched well, although the question will be, what does it produce? The most overstudied neighborhood in the province. Hugely complex issues we talk about every week on the show that the panelists has talked about here. How do you tackle those, in the toughest neighborhood to tackle them in the entire province? So we'll see what Larry Campbell comes up with. Check out Da Vinci's Inquest, by the way. Great show based on some of his earlier career. Big fan of that. I don't think it airs on CHEK, but that's okay. You can change the channel if you need to watch that show.
Hey now.
It's probably on streaming somewhere too. All right. Thanks to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast for some extras. We'll be back next week with the legislative session beginning with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital.
Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.